Among the many names that shaped computers in the 1990s, few were more influential than Compaq. Here, in Userlandia, I think I'm a clone now. Welcome back to Computers of Significant History, an analysis of the history of computing in terms of how it affected the life of one writer. In previous episodes, we looked at three pivotal computers from the 80s. Now we're in 1993, when the unpredictable and chaotic market for personal computers had settled into a respectable groove. IBM compatibles were number one in home and business computers, with the Macintosh trailing behind them. High-powered RISC workstations from Sun, Silicon Graphics, IBM, and Hewlett-Packard had completely overtaken the high end of the market. Commodore was in a death spiral, and Atari had already crashed and burned. Acorn's move to license their ARM architecture was about to pay major dividends in the mobile market. Other companies had switched to making their own IBM PC clones, if they hadn't given up on computers entirely. If you wanted to replace your aging 80s machine, you could get an IBM compatible, or you could get a Mac, or you could sit back and not complain, because there were starving children in other countries who didn't have any computers at all. As I mentioned a few episodes back, my family kept a Commodore 64 as our primary computer until 1997. True, that old C64 is becoming more obsolete every day, but a $2,000 PC, in early 90s money, was a tough ask for a working-class family like mine, because General Electric CEO and Saturday morning cartoon supervillain Jack Welch was busy destroying tens of thousands of lives in his ruthless quest for efficiency and profit. Not that I'm bitter. Jack started his professional life in my hometown of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, but fond nostalgia didn't stop him from lopping off various parts of the city's industrial apparatus and selling them to the highest bidder. First to go was GE's Electric Transformer Factory, which was raided, closed, and left to rot. Next in line was the defense business, sold to Martin Marietta for $3 billion. Only GE's plastics division, which, by pure coincidence, is where Welch got his start, was spared. My father was one of thousands laid off from their well-paying blue-collar industrial jobs at the GE. He joined GE straight out of high school, and 25 years later it was all he knew. He had to scrounge for work, and my mom had to start a career too. My oldest brother was a freshman in college, and tuition was priority number one. Big-ticket items like a new computer were way down the list. You might recall from the previous Computers of Significant History that an IBM PS2 Model 30-286 joined my C64 in April 1997 for almost 6 months of cohabitation. They were uneasy roommates until my uncle made a surprise visit in October 1997. In the back of his Ford Taurus was none other than his Compaq ProLinea 433 with Super VGA monitor and Panasonic color dot matrix printer. He had recently bought a shiny new Pentium 2 tower, and the Compaq needed a new home. I was thrilled. I finally had a computer that could run modern software. I didn't have to stay late after school anymore to write papers in a real word processor. More importantly, the internal 288K modem was a significant upgrade over the 9600 bits per second slowpoke I'd been using over the summer. I handed the Commodore and PS2 their eviction notices and installed the Compaq in its rightful spot on the downstairs computer desk. Next up was a thorough inspection of this new-to-me PC. The ProLinea's exterior was, well, it's an exterior. While Compaq had their own stable of design cues, they're all in service of maintaining the PC status quo. Sure, there are horizontal air vents and an integrated floppy drive, but Compaq's desktops don't stand out from the crowd of Dell, Gateway, and AST. Say what you will about IBM, but at least they have a distinct sense of industrial design. You're more likely to notice the ProLinea's height, or lack thereof. It was significantly thinner than the average PC clone. An embossed 433 case badge proudly announced an Intel 33MHz 486DX inside. But there's more to a computer than the CPU. How much RAM and hard drive space did it have? What about its graphics and sound capabilities? None of that can be gleaned from the exterior, and the only way to know is to crack open the case. If you're like me, and let's face it, if you're watching this you probably are, then you would have done what I did. After a few days of using my new computer, I opened it up to see what was inside. Undoing 3 screws and sliding the cover off was all it took to gain entry. Compaq utilized several tricks to minimize exterior footprint and maximize internal volume. Floppy drives were stacked on top of each other, the power supply occupied the space behind them, and the hard drive stole space above the motherboard. Beside the hard drive is a riser card, which shaved height off the case by changing the orientation of the expansion slots. 3 standard 16-bit ISA slots lived on side A of the riser, and one decidedly non-standard half-height ISA slot for Compaq's proprietary modems lived on side B. One of the full-height slots was populated with a US Robotics 288K modem, which was decent for the time. 4 SIMs of 4 megabytes each lived in 4 slots for a total of 16 megs of memory. A 240 megabyte Quantum hard drive left the PS2's 20 meg drive in the dust. These were sensible specifications for the affordable 486's golden age of 1993. Aside from a faster CPU, most 486-based computers had 2 major advancements over their 386 predecessors: an external SRAM cache and VESA local bus graphics. Unfortunately, there's no Level 2 cache in the ProLinea, which puts a bit of a damper on the 486's performance. Was this lowering the barrier of entry, or artificial segmentation to push people towards a pricier mid-range Desk Pro I? You decide. At least Compaq included local bus graphics by integrating a Sung Labs ET4000W32 graphics chip and 1 megabyte of video RAM to the motherboard. Windows performance was more important than ever in 1993, and the W32 variant included Windows graphics acceleration routines. A lack of cache hurts Excel, but a wimpy graphics processor hurts every application. But at the time I got this computer, none of that mattered. Cache or no cache, a 33 MHz 486 couldn't hang with a 233 MHz Pentium 2. Still, it was rare for most PCs to live through the 90s without getting upgrades to extend their lives, and my ProLinea was no exception. I was constantly tinkering with it from the day my uncle gave it to me until its retirement in 2002. After surveying what I had, I prioritized 2 specific upgrades: a sound card and a CD-ROM drive. Compaq didn't include any sound hardware in the ProLinea except for the buzzy internal PC speaker. Since hand-cranked gramophones weren't compatible, you had 2 choices for better sound: buy an optional sound card, or spend more money on a Desk Pro I with integrated sound. I'm sure Compaq would have preferred the latter. As a broke teenager, my goal was to get some form of sound card and CD-ROM without spending a lot of money. In 1997, eBay was still just a startup. I'd never heard of it. So that meant a trip to our local used computer store, Recompute. Located on First Street in beautiful downtown Pittsfield, Recompute bought and sold all kinds of old computers and parts. The clerk recommended a double-speed Creative Labs CD-ROM drive which connected to, you guessed it, a Creative Labs Sound Blaster Pro. Sound cards back in the day often had ports to connect a CD-ROM drive, and companies like Creative sold multimedia upgrade kits, combining a sound card, CD-ROM, cheap speakers, and software. Sometimes you'd get lucky and get a nice encyclopedia and a copy of Sam & Max Hit the Road. Other times it'd just be a clump of shovelware to inflate that dollars of value sticker. Before ATAPI, installing a CD-ROM drive into a PC required either a SCSI adapter or a proprietary interface card. There were some sound cards that had cut-down SCSI controllers, but SCSI is overkill for attaching a single CD-ROM drive. Every penny matters when selling low-cost upgrade kits, so a costly SCSI controller doesn't make much sense. Luckily, Creative had a margin padding solution at the ready. Panasonic, the company actually building Creative branded drives, had their own proprietary CD-ROM interface. It was cheaper than SCSI, used familiar 40-pin ATA cables, and took up minimal board space. Panasonic's interface lacked SCSI's messy complexity, like termination, so it was simple to install too. Just don't make the mistake of thinking that Panasonic's interface was compatible with ATA, even though they used the same cables. The downside to proprietary is that without a matching card, in this case a Sound Blaster Pro 2.0, the drive might as well be a doorstop. I don't remember the exact cost. It couldn't have been much, honestly. But it was enough that I had to borrow a few dollars from one of my brothers to close the sale. Then again, you get what you pay for, even if, to 14-year-old me, that was a major investment. And my wonderful bargain of a creative combo turned out to be on the unreliable side. It got exasperating, having to fix the speaker jack again and again and again and again. Fortunately, after a rather frustrating year audio-wise, I had both a new 16-bit ESS sound card with wavetable synthesis and a faster 24x ATAPI CD-ROM drive. Thank you, birthday and Christmas presents. The 28.8K modem gave way to 56K, which eventually gave way to an Ethernet card to connect to a cable modem. Yes, these are all very sensible upgrades, but they're like adding suspension parts to a car. They're helpful for handling, but they won't give the car more power. The ProLinea needed more power, and this brings us to the most momentous upgrade of them all, a Kingston Turbo Chip. Utilizing a 133 MHz AMD AM5X86, the Turbo Chip was a drop-in upgrade CPU that was 4 times faster than my 33 MHz 486. Although AMD claimed its level of performance was similar to a 75 MHz Pentium, it was still a 486 at its core. At a cost of $100 in 1999, the Turbo Chip was considerably less money than a new computer. Even though upgrade processors are never as good as a new system, it still gave the ProLinea a much-needed boost. A 33 MHz 486 barely met the minimum requirements for Office 97 and Internet Explorer 4.0, let alone IE 5.0. The Turbo Chip breathed new life into the sputtering ProLinea, improving performance in those apps and opening doors to new ones. Somehow this computer managed to play a video CD of the South Park movie, which I'm sure I obtained legally, even if I don't remember precisely how. Such a feat would have been impossible without the upgrades. Where the Turbo Chip wasn't as helpful was in gaming. Even a speedy 486 couldn't keep up with the superior floating point performance of a Pentium. Games like Quake were a choppy mess, but I wasn't missing that much since I could, borrow my brother's PlayStation. But no matter how many upgrades I stuffed into the ProLinea, time was catching up to the aging PC. No further CPU upgrades were available, and that proprietary motherboard layout with the riser card meant I couldn't swap in a new board without impractical modifications. The hard drive was slow and cramped, and the BIOS complained loudly about drives larger than 500 megabytes. I couldn't fight reality anymore. I needed a whole new computer. Millions of people across America were facing the same conundrum, and wouldn't you know it, companies like Compaq were right there waiting to give them a hand. They ranked number 1 in market share from 1994 to 2000, and only disappeared from the chart after merging with HP. But they wouldn't have achieved that market dominance without the ProLinea. How'd they manage that anyway? Would you believe boardroom backstabbing? Of course you would. The Clone Wars. With years of hindsight, it's easy to say that Compaq would dominate the PC clone world. After all, they started the fire by building the first commercially successful IBM-compatible computer that could withstand legal challenges from Big Blue. But that's the thing about cloning. Once you've proven it can be done, someone's going to copy your copy. Compaq handled competition the best way it could, by becoming a leader. Soon it was IBM against Compaq, leading a horde of cloners fighting for control of the Intel-based MS-DOS ecosystem. Compaq took the performance crown by shipping the first 386 PC in 1986, showing that IBM was no longer in control of its own platform. If you've watched the previous Computers of Significant History, you'll remember that IBM's grand plan for regaining control of the PC platform came in the form of microchannel architecture. One reason Compaq beat IBM to the 386 punch was by iterating on an already proven design. They used the existing 16-bit AT bus, better known as ISA, or ISA, however you pronounce it, found in every other PC clone. Of course, the industry standard architecture wasn't industry standard because it was the best. It was industry standard because IBM's Boca Raton dev team published the specs for everyone to see. The explosive popularity of IBM's PC and PC-AT, combined with an open bus, created a fertile field for all kinds of add-in cards. But ISA had its limits. With a maximum width of 16 bits and sensitive clock timing, ISA was too slow to take full advantage of the 386. Plus, installing ISA cards required arcane rituals, like setting jumpers or dip switches to configure memory addresses and interrupt requests. And woe betide you if those settings were hardwired. In 1986, shipping a machine with the ISA bus was a smart choice, despite its limitations. 32-bit memory could be put on SIMs, or proprietary memory boards, and avoid the worst of ISA's speed penalties, while keeping ISA slots free for peripheral cards. Even if a 32-bit bus was available, most peripherals of the era wouldn't saturate it. For the time being, keeping compatibility with existing cards was the winning move for Compaq. But that wouldn't always be true. ISA needed to be replaced someday. IBM decided that day was April 2, 1987, the PS2's launch, and the boys from Boca thought they had a winner. Microchannel slots had advanced features like software configuration, 32-bit bus width, and more megahertz for more throughput. But all these benefits came with a catch. MCA used a completely different connector than ISA, breaking compatibility with existing cards. That wouldn't have been so bad if IBM had included an ISA slot or two in MCA PS2s. But MCA was an all-or-nothing proposition. Software configuration required system-specific reference disks that you'd better not lose, unlike the literal plug-and-play found in NuBus on the Mac or Zorro on the Amiga. But the most aggravating thing of all was that IBM locked down microchannel with a plethora of patents. After all, MCA took a lot of research and development, and that didn't come for free. They thought everybody would line up to integrate this next-generation bus and wouldn't mind paying for the privilege. It wasn't long before IBM's grand plan collapsed under the weight of their hubris. Compaq and the other cloners weren't willing to give IBM a chunk of money for every machine they built. Instead, Compaq led a group of 8 other companies called the Gang of Nine in designing their own 32-bit expansion slot called the Extended Industry Standard Architecture, or EISA, or EISA. Still not sure how that's pronounced. Because EISA was cheaper and backwards compatible, it stopped MCA from going mainstream. Then again, EISA never went mainstream either. It was mostly found in workstations and servers. Most PCs would have to wait until the arrival of PCI to finally kill ISA dead. While Compaq was a market leader in the 80s, they weren't without their faults. Truthfully, they weren't that different from Apple in terms of how they pitched and priced their products. Compaq's main clientele were businesses, power users, and professionals who demanded powerful machines that cost less than IBM's. Other cloners, like AST, Dell, and Zenith, were all competing with Compaq in that same market. But they were more popular in mid-range segments, where they were constantly undercutting each other. If you're too thrifty for a name brand, white label PCs from places like Bob's House of Genuine Computer Parts, wink wink, or Mad Macy's mail-order motherboards were always an option. Buyer beware though. Most of these small fry lack the kind of warranty or support that you'd get from a brand name company. Everything changed when Packard Bell and Gateway 2000 attacked. These upstarts were building computers with specs that could trade blows with the more prestigious companies while selling at white label prices. Gateway was a mail order operation, while Packard Bell attacked the growing big box retail segment. Dell, AST, and other cloners responded by lowering prices and building cheaper PCs. Compaq didn't, and their balance sheet suffered accordingly. Boardroom battles erupted in 1991 between Chairman Ben Rosen and CEO Rod Canyon. Rosen wanted Compaq to aggressively pursue the home and entry-level markets, while Canyon wanted to stay the course. He was one of Compaq's founders, and the company had amazing success under his leadership. Compaq was still making money hand over fist, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Compaq's corporate reckoning came on October 23, 1991, halfway through that year's fall Comdex. Faced with the company's first quarterly loss, Rod Canyon had to take serious action. The next day, he laid off over 1,400 employees and then presented an 18-month plan to attack the entry-level market. For most companies, this would have been a sensible turnaround plan. But what Canyon didn't know was that Rosen had dispatched a team to Las Vegas to covertly attend Comdex and do a little recon. That secret team put together an alternate plan that could bring a low-cost PC to market by the summer of 1992, half the time of Canyon's proposal. With his new strategy in place, Rosen and the board fired Canyon on October 25, 1991, the final day of Comdex. Compaq's COO Eckhard Pfeiffer was promoted to CEO, and the company poured everything it had into building a new low-cost product line. Announced on June 15, 1992, Compaq's new ProLinea range of personal computers arrived a month ahead of schedule and with much fanfare for the press. Tech company press releases can get pretty schlocky, and Compaq's were no exception. A nameless Compaq executive really thought they hit the jackpot with the Goldilocks strategy of offering Papa, Mama, and Baby computers. That's not subtext, it's actual text. I don't like this analogy for a variety of reasons, mainly because it's creatively bankrupt and condescending. I'm sure the nameless executive thought this was their most brilliant idea, even though they fundamentally misunderstood both the setup and moral of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Still, you gotta work with what they give you. If the existing Desk Pro M was Papa Bear, the new Desk Pro I was Mama Bear, and the ProLinea was Baby Bear. Starting at $899, the tiny 2-slot ProLinea 325ZS was a warning to other low-cost makers that Compaq was ready for war. Price war. Joining the compact ZS series was a bigger 3-slot ProLinea S desktop with a 5¼ drive bay and options for more powerful processors. If either of those weren't enough for you, the Desk Pro I and M were there to satisfy all your power user needs. It was up to you to determine which machine was just right, and then eat its porridge and sleep in its bed? My opinion of fairy tale-based marketing strategies aside, these machines were an immediate hit. Compaq didn't let off the gas either. A year later in 1993, they simplified the lineup by retiring the 386 CPUs and ditching the undersized ZS model, so that was goodbye to one of the baby bears. The S model was now the standard ProLinea, with CPUs ranging from a 25 MHz 486SX to a 66 MHz 486DX2. 4 MB of RAM came standard, and hard drive sizes ranged from 120 to 340 MB. In addition to all the standard specs, Compaq offered a long list of options like modems, storage, networking, and multimedia. How much did my uncle pay for his sensible mid-range computer in 1993? I hit the books and found several reviews of the ProLinea 433. My old standby of PC Computing reviewed the 1992 models, which had plenty of useful information. But for accuracy's sake, I needed a 1993 review. PC Magazine's September 1993 Value PC Roundup had just what I needed. Roundup reviews like these are a fun relic of the electronics press. a time long past when budgets were big enough that editors could write a bunch of checks to review 10 computers at once. PC Magazine staff writer Oliver Rist was generally positive on the ProLinea, citing its competitive performance at a low price, along with Compaq's above-average service and support. His only knock was against the video chipset, which doesn't really square with the results in the benchmark charts. The ProLinea is right in the middle of the pack for the graphics WinMark scores, with only a few outliers completely destroying the rest of the competition. PC Mag's ProLinea came with 8 megs of RAM, a 240 meg hard drive, dual floppies, and a monitor for the cool cost of $2,300. That was still a decent chunk of change for a computer, but a year earlier, a powerful Compaq Desk Pro with a 33 MHz 46DX cost nearly 3 times as much. Now ordinary people could buy PCs capable of running multiple Windows applications simultaneously with an acceptable level of performance. Until the machine crashed or froze, of course, because we're still talking about Windows 3.1. Still, you could do a lot worse in 1993 than these PCs. The ProLinea was step 1 in Compaq's multi-point plan for world domination. If the new game was being number 1 in market share, then so be it. They would be number 1. First, Compaq changed their sales strategies by adding new channels in addition to their traditional dealer network. The most obvious move was creating a new factory direct sales operation to compete head-to-head with Gateway and Dell. Next, they needed to counter Packard Bell in the growing big box retail segment. Stores like Circuit City, Nobody Beats the Wiz, and even Sears were pushing computers as they became cheaper and more mainstream. Apple Performas and IBM PS1s were already there, and Compaq joined the fray with the Presario in 1993. Originally an all-in-one model, the Presario name grew to represent Compaq's entry-level retail brand. For a while, the same desktops and towers were labeled as ProLinea or Presario, depending on whether they were sold in dealer or retail channels. But by the end of 1996, Compaq realized that was silly and condensed everything under the Presario label. Think about famous computer names: ThinkPad, Macintosh, VAIO. All of these brands conjure up something specific, something emotional. ThinkPad is a black and red machine that means business and reliability. Macintosh means style, ease of use, and it just works. VAIO evokes cutting-edge hi-fi design and multimedia prowess. When I hear Presario, I think of nondescript beige boxes that were no different than a dozen other PCs. Far more important than the Presario's B-list name was its A-list marketing strategy. Compaq's aggressive marketing, combined with just the right level of hardware for the average user, meant that millions of people connected to the web for the first time thanks to a Compaq computer. Presario had enough recognition to get some eulogies when HP retired the Compaq and Presario names in 2013. The ProLinea, though, as far as I can tell, nobody cared enough to write an article, or even a press release, about the retirement of Compaq's first entry-level computer brand. Beige to the future. I moved on from the trusty ProLinea in the year 2000 when I bought a Hewlett-Packard Pavilion with a 600 MHz Pentium 3, using my wages as a supermarket cashier. My dad kept the Compaq as his own personal machine, but even his tolerance for slow computers had a limit. He replaced it in October 2002 with a Compaq Presario from Staples, something in the 5000 series that had a white case with transparent gray plastic. What happened to the ProLinea after that? I have no idea. I was off to college at the time, and my younger sister wasn't far behind. With the last of their children ready to leave the nest, my parents cleaned out the detritus generated by 3 sons and a daughter. Maybe it went to some e-waste pile, or maybe it was picked up by someone who cared about old technology. Hopefully it was the latter. Unlike the move from the Commodore to the Compaq, my next PC wasn't as much of a quantum leap. It still ran Windows, it still connected to the internet, and it still played games. It just did them all faster and with more bells and whistles. By the late 90s, most traces of personality were beaten out of most PCs, leaving the workstation makers and Steve Jobs' resurgent Apple as the only real purveyors of character. I suppose that's the nature of many mass-market products. A Sony Walkman was a novel idea, and then the portable tape player market slowly grew stale as manufacturers built disposable items at the lowest possible cost. To their credit, Sony kept at it until the bitter end, and they still managed to put a bit of character in everything they make. So why does this boring, bland, basic beige box, which didn't stick out from the crowd at all, still have a place in my heart? It's because it was from my uncle, of course. As a microbiologist, he was deeply involved with science and technology. He saw my growing love of computers and tech and wanted to help me towards a career in that field. Yes, he knew I would spend just as much time playing games or surfing online than using it for schoolwork. But that's okay. Just having an environment to explore was enough. The world was growing more connected by the day, and you could get on board or be left behind. It's hard not to look at the millions of Wintel machines shipped during the 90s and ask, where's the character? After all, they looked the same, used the same processors, and ran the same operating systems. Few manufacturers innovated, and many ended up chasing trends, Compaq included. But the mistake I made was not recognizing that even the most neutral of computers is colored by its user. Every vintage PC I've picked up has some story to tell. A machine with bone stock hardware can have the wildest software lurking on its hard drive. An unassuming beige box can conceal massive modifications. There was nothing unique or special about my ProLinea, at least not until I hot-rodded it with a bunch of upgrades. It didn't really matter that it was a Compaq. The role could have been played by a Gateway, Packard Bell, or even a Xeos, and the show would have gone on. I would have upgraded and stretched out any PC I owned, because it's my nature. I've grumbled quite a bit in various episodes about what we've lost from the golden age of microcomputing. I can't help it. Middle-age nostalgia is brain poison, and it'll infect you if it hasn't already. But as I've gotten back into serious computer history research, my old man yells at cloud instincts have given way to a more pleasant sense of wonder. By itself, a computer is just a steel box with some wires and sand inside of it. Whether it's a common Compaq or a colossal Cray, a computer can't do anything without a person behind it. That was true in the golden age of the 80s, it was true in the 90s, and it's still true today. So even though Windows was kinda crashy, and software never quite worked the way it was supposed to, things in the 90s were a hell of a lot easier to use than they were in the 80s, and more reliable to boot. Maybe the lack of platform diversity was worse for us nerds, but it was better for society for us to settle down a bit and not introduce mutually incompatible computers every couple of years. All of the criticisms of machines like the ProLinea and the Presarios that replaced it were correct. But without this army of beige PCs heralded by Compaq, maybe the World Wide Web wouldn't have taken off like it did. Maybe I've been a little too hard on beige. But at the end of the day, we all want something that gets out of our way and lets us be who we are. What's more beige than that? Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing, and I'll catch you next time here in Userlandia.